And joining me right now, ladies and gentlemen, Sharyl Attkisson. She's host of Sinclair's Full Measure with Sharyl Attkisson. You could see that on Sunday. Check your local listings. Also the author of an upcoming book, The Smear, How Shady Political Operatives and Fake News Control What You See, What You Think, and How You Vote. That will be out June 27th. You could pre-order everywhere you would go to buy and pre-order a book. Sharyl, welcome.
Thank you.
Oh boy, do I have so much to talk to you about, and we'll get to what's coming up on your show in a little bit. But let's talk about this Manchester horror, and I'm actually hearing on TV from people, from names we would all know on MSNBC, Morning Joe guests and hosts. I'm hearing, are we sure ISIS would have signed off on this? Because it's bad publicity for ISIS. I mean, to be killing little girls, as if terrorists really don't kill little girls. And I went and I looked at Mayalat in Israel. I looked at the Sparrows bombing, the school bus bombing in Israel. I looked at Beslan in Russia. I mean, terrorists don't kill children. What is going on here?
I think it's the strangest thing, sort of the left turn the narrative takes on a lot of these terrorist attacks after the fact, where we get fixated in the media, it seems, on, well, were they inspired by or was it official? Were they a lone wolf or were they acting together? Who cares? I mean, from an intelligence standpoint, when you're trying to prevent this stuff, some of that matters, of course. But in the general discussion, I think it matters very little whether someone takes official responsibility or not. We know exactly what it was. And, the larger problem kind of drowns in this weird discussion over the minutia.
Yeah, and they get so tied up in it. It's always as if to make excuses somehow for the terrorists. I mean, ISIS burns people alive, chops off heads, but they wouldn't sign off on a bomb where there's a bunch of kids at a concert.
Well, that's, and it's known that they do that, and that's what our officials will say makes it so difficult to fight them in many respects, that they have no rules. They will and do and want to kill civilians and children and women, whereby we operate by a different set of moral and ethical standards, of course, and we can't do the same. So if they are hiding amidst civilians and family members, they know that there's not much we will do versus the tactics that they use to get at the rest of the world.
All right. Now, another thing that's gone kind of unnoticed is homegrown. They keep talking, this guy's homegrown. You see? It's not just those bad guys who come over. They are homegrown. This guy left the country. They believe now with pretty much certainty that he just recently visited Syria. I'm sorry. If I got a guy who's supposedly on the radar and he goes to visit Syria, A, how is he ever let back in the country? And B, why isn't he locked up or questioned immediately?
I think that what we've seen is, and we'll be reporting on this in the near future, with all of the restrictions we put on ourselves in many ways in intelligence gathering and who we suspect and who we don't, it's almost like we've built this giant haystack, a bigger haystack than we can even go through to find the needles. And every time you hear a terrorist event, it seems as though they were on the radar or we knew about them. But even when these people were placed literally on our plate before us, either in Europe or here in the United States, we somehow missed it, or we somehow weren't able to follow them, and prevent this from happening. And I would say it almost necessitates a total change in the way we look at things, only based on our lack of success in the past. But if you suggest such a thing, there's a lot of bucking of that by our intelligence community. When I had an interview recently where someone pointed out there are great intelligence professionals here, some of the best in the world, many devoted men and women who've done a great job. However, you can't argue with the fact that they have missed a lot. There is something going on that is allowing gaping holes in our system, despite all the intelligence we're collecting and all the money we're putting into this. Some really obvious people are slipping through the cracks and committing terrorist attacks. We have to figure out, hopefully, why that's been allowed to happen. Political
correctness?
I think that's part of it, and the people who work in the intel community will tell you that's part of it. They're not allowed to heavily pursue somebody who then went on, by the way, to commit a terrorist attack because, they're restricted from doing so unless certain signals are there. And there are, of course, these people, until they commit an act, do have civil liberties and civil rights. And, it's a question of what you do to balance all of that, because certainly you don't want to lift those entirely.
All right, let's talk about another media narrative, which is also unfortunate. I mean, yesterday I sat there and watched John Brennan say that, basically, he has seen no evidence. And then he played a word game, well, I don't look for evidence. He's seen no evidence of collusion. And the media changes the narrative. He also said, I've given classified information to my Russian counterpart when it comes to fighting terror. So the media, they can't deal that anymore. They can't do it. So they changed the narrative. Ooh, he was afraid that he's verified there were contacts. Well, we've known there were contacts forever. What is it? I mean, will they ever be honest and have integrity on this issue or anything involving Trump?
Well, I think a lot of people and pundits in the media have interest in furthering the narrative despite logic and evidence, because I think there has been no public evidence of any collusion. And you look at that term, I mean, it's something that I write about in the Smear. Since everybody's using the term collusion, which isn't like an ordinary term that comes off the tip of your lips, but it's a narrative that was pushed early on that everybody has picked up. And when everyone's using a similar term, you can at least suspect that maybe a narrative is being pushed. What does that mean exactly? No one has explained, if you play that out, do they believe that Donald Trump met with Putin and said, somehow you help me in the election and I will do this for you, and here's how we will do this, here's how we will take the election? I've never heard anybody play that level of detail, what the collusion could possibly be, and if it would be against the law, because collusion itself is not necessarily against the law. So I think it was a carefully chosen narrative that was pushed, a carefully chosen word. But I think many people are stuck on it because they have a larger goal, which they've stated, which is to take out this president. And maybe they think that's their best shot.
And, if anything, 9 months before an election, when we know that for decades Russia has tried to influence our elections, a sitting president who's running for re-election 9 months out says to the president of Russia, tell Vladimir I'll have more leeway once this election is over. That to me smacks more of collusion or like, leave me alone. I'll wink, wink, nod, nod. I'll take care of things. And then he went on to watch him take Crimea. He went on to watch him do whatever he wanted in Syria. To me, that's the case, if anything.
Well, let me be clear. I'm not accusing anybody of collusion. But if you're going by the same standards the media and pundits are putting out there now, there is more evidence of collusion between President Obama and the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, Iran, in secretly conducting deals that were hidden from the public, money changing hands that was, the truth was not told about that publicly initially, swapping of prisoners, all of these things that happened, and yes, contacts with Russia. Way more evidence, if that's your standard, under other administrations and other political contacts than have been made, in my view, under this administration. But, that's not part of the discussion because there's a narrative being pushed, in my view.
Yeah, one other thing on this very quickly, the leaks. Even Brennan stressed how very, very detrimental and serious the leaks are. And nobody in the media seems to care about these leaks.
I really do think, just from my standpoint, the biggest part of all the discussion going on, even bigger than the leaks to me, is the unmasking or the possible political use of intelligence material gathered on ordinary Americans and our elected figures and how that could be used. This is something that I think if you'd have told people 30 years ago or our forefathers about that, it would be so outrageous. But there's been this slow kind of drip of information coming out so people aren't quite so shocked about it. This is unbelievable. If political officials were unmasking so-called incidentally collected intelligence, people whose names really should have never have been revealed, and if they were doing it for political reasons, and I think there's every reason to suspect that's possible, this is a huge story and a huge infringement on every basic right that Americans are supposed to have in this country, in my view. And I think that should be pursued with much more vigor by authorities, by members of Congress, and by us in the media. Before we get to your show, one more real quick, the Seth Rich case. Fox News, there was this Fox News guy, local out of Washington, a former investigator or current investigator, who made all these claims, and now you have some people on the internet saying Seth Rich provided WikiLeaks with documents. I mean, it was suspicious, certainly, 4 a.m., They say it's a botched robbery. He had his phone and his wallet, everything laying there. There's no one around. They could have taken what they wanted. The family says, leave us alone. Hannity backed off yesterday. He said at the behest of the family, but he's not guaranteeing he's done with it.
What's your take on how this has been covered by very few and not covered by the vast majority?
Well, I think they're important questions, and it's sort of, you know, in my view, if you don't know who murdered him, you can't really say, please don't look here. That's a conspiracy theory. But I feel for the family, but I also feel as though they are, to some degree, based on my instincts, being managed. I think the letter that they wrote, I think it was in the Washington Post, if I had to guess, I would suspect that was done with help. Doesn't mean they certainly didn't feel that way and didn't sign it. But as I report in my book, many op-eds are generated and written by special interests that had a very professional tone about it. Someone may have helped and urged them to do it. Again, doesn't mean there aren't genuine feelings behind it, but I think this news issue I sense is being managed at various levels by people who don't want this case discussed.
Sharyl, what does your gut tell you? Are we talking about Democratic officials, police officials? Who might be helping them manage this?
I don't know enough to say. It just smacks of a managed situation, as many news situations are and do. And I think it's too bad that just by pressure on either advertisers or public pressure, even from the family, that people would stop looking into a legitimate news story and asking legitimate questions just because there's pressure or somebody has ginned it up. That's sort of I think, a dangerous, relatively new development in recent years, that there's pressure to just stop covering a story entirely. You know, they tried that with Benghazi. That's called, to this day, the Media Matters folks will say it's a discredited story, which never was. And in fact, that was for me anyway, one of my most highly recognized stories by independent, journalism groups. Nothing I reported, not only did it not prove wrong, but I reported way ahead on things that were later shown to be correct, by irrefutable evidence. So there's these narratives to try to stop a discussion and stop an investigation altogether, rather than just provide different viewpoints to it.
Yeah.
That's a scary development. That's sort of like a censorship. And when you sense that's going on, that's always told me, that's happened on my biggest stories, that you're getting to something that could be very true and very damaging to interests who want to prevent it.
All right.
That's always a signal for me. It has been in the past, at least.
All right. Very interesting take on that, and I appreciate it. This week, on Sharyl Sinclair's Full Measure with you, Sharyl Attkisson, on Sunday. Check your local listings. Chairmanships, very powerful chairmanships on congressional committees, House and Senate. Are you saying that it's sometimes, or maybe most times, it's the person who could raise the most money gets those chairmanships?
Well, something like that. They actually have quotas that are set forth, and this happened about a month ago, happens every year, where the members get a piece of paper that tells how much money they have to raise for the party every 2 years, a certain quota. And if you don't raise the right amount and you're on one of these A-list committees, you won't get that position for very long. You certainly won't be considered for a chairmanship. But what's happened is they have to raise so much money and spend so much time, government time, our public time doing it, that they raise it from the very interest they're supposed to regulate. And I've talked about this for years. People don't understand the reason things happen on the Hill, hearings are held or are not held, has little to do with us. It has to do with what the special interests that are supposed to be regulated want, because they're giving contributions to those members on the committee.
Wow.
So you go to the Defense Committee, they're taking contributions from defense contractors. They're doing, in many respects, in my view, their bidding, not ours, when they hold hearings or choose not to hold hearings on certain things. Every committee is like that.
Much more on that on Full Measure with Sharyl Attkisson this weekend. Sharyl, always great to talk to you. We'll speak to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, folks, and don't forget, stay in tune and stay in touch at NewsmaxTV.com and Newsmax.com. We'll see you next time.